Drew McIntyre's career just ended in WWE. Let Jacob Fatu get away with murder at War Games. What happened to Drew McIntyre at War Games wasn't wrestling, wasn't entertainment, and shouldn't have been allowed to air on any platform that claims to care about human safety. Jacob Fatu returned with a level of vengeance that crossed every professional boundary, and the destruction he unleashed on the Scottish Warrior was so brutal, so personal, so unhinged that multiple people backstage are now demanding investigations into whether WWE has completely lost control of their talent. Before I break down every horrifying moment of this assault disguised as payback, answer me this: is Drew McIntyre the most disrespected top star in WWE history for constantly being sacrificed to make others look unstoppable, or has someone been treated worse? Drop your answer below, because what Jacob Fatu just did to Drew is going to make you absolutely furious at how WWE protects some wrestlers while hanging others out to dry. The context leading into War Games is crucial to understanding just how calculated and personal Jacob Fatu's vengeance actually was. Weeks ago, Drew McIntyre had been one of the few superstars brave enough to stand up to the Bloodline's dominance, publicly calling out their tactics and challenging their claim to being untouchable. Drew specifically targeted Jacob Fatu during a backstage confrontation, questioning whether Fatu was really as dangerous as everyone claimed or just another overhyped muscle guy hiding behind Roman Reigns' protection. Those words, that disrespect, that challenge to Jacob's credibility, festered in Fatu's mind like an infected wound, and at War Games, he finally had the opportunity to respond in the most vicious way imaginable. The match structure of War Games already creates an environment where extreme violence is expected and even encouraged. 2 teams, 2 rings, 1 massive steel cage surrounding everything, weapons hidden under the rings, and a setup that's designed to produce chaos and carnage. But what Jacob Fatu did transcended the already brutal War Games environment and entered territory that made even hardened wrestling veterans uncomfortable. From the moment his music hit and he entered the cage as the final member of his team, you could see the focused rage in his eyes, the singular obsession with finding Drew McIntyre and making him pay for every word of disrespect he'd ever spoken. Drew McIntyre never saw it coming, and that's what makes this so infuriating. The Scottish Warrior was in the middle of dominating 2 opponents, having just hit a future shock DDT on one and a Glasgow Kiss headbutt on another. He was the strongest performer in the match up to that point, the one giving his team hope that they could actually overcome the Bloodline's numbers advantage. Then Jacob Fatu's music hit, the cage door opened, and everything changed in an instant. The look on Drew's face when he saw who was entering told the whole story. He knew exactly what was coming, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. Quick question for the comments: what's the most impactful entrance in War Games history? Let me know below, because Jacob Fatu's arrival might have just claimed that title through sheer intimidation factor. Jacob didn't waste a single second on anyone else. He entered that cage with tunnel vision, charging directly at Drew McIntyre like a missile locked onto its target. The initial spear that took Drew down looked like it broke him in half. The impact echoed through the arena, and Drew's body folded completely from the force of over 300 pounds hitting him at full speed. But that spear wasn't meant to incapacitate Drew. It was meant to hurt him, to let him know that the pain had only just begun, and that the next 20 minutes of his life would be the most agonizing he'd ever experienced. What happened next was systematic destruction that seemed to follow a deliberate plan Jacob had been visualizing for weeks. He dragged Drew to the corner and hit 3 consecutive hip attacks, each one driving Drew's spine into the turnbuckles with bone-crushing force. Drew's back was already showing bruising and discoloration from previous damage in the match, and Jacob was specifically targeting that injured area with surgical precision. Between each hip attack, Jacob would pause, lean in close to Drew's face, and say something that the cameras couldn't pick up but that clearly caused Drew even more psychological pain than the physical punishment. The weapon usage in War Games is always a featured element, but Jacob Fatu turned it into a horror show specifically designed to humiliate and destroy Drew McIntyre. He pulled a table from under the ring, but instead of setting it up for a big spot, he broke it into pieces with his bare hands and used the wooden shards as weapons, scraping them across Drew's back and chest, leaving bloody trails across the Scottish Warrior's body. He found a steel chair and didn't just hit Drew with it once or twice. He hit him 17 times, and multiple people backstage were counting, unable to look away from the brutality but also unable to do anything to stop it because the match was still officially happening. The most disturbing moment came when Jacob Fatu set up a table bridged between the 2 rings inside the cage. This table placement is a classic War Games setup that usually leads to a spectacular spot that gets replayed for years. But what Jacob did wasn't spectacular. It was attempted murder. He dragged Drew's barely conscious body to the top rope, lifted him into a military press position showing terrifying strength, then threw Drew off the top rope through the table with such force that Drew went completely through it and crashed into the mat below with nothing to break his fall. The sound of that impact, with splintering and body hitting canvas, actually made several people in the front row scream in genuine horror. Do you think War Games has become too dangerous and should be retired as a match concept, or is this exactly the brutality fans want to see? Share your honest opinion in the comments. Drew McIntyre's body was broken at this point, but Jacob Fatu wasn't finished exacting his vengeance. He pulled Drew up by his hair, holding him in a standing position even though Drew's legs clearly couldn't support his weight anymore. Jacob hit a superkick that snapped Drew's head back violently, then immediately followed with a Samoan drop that drove what little air remained in Drew's lungs out of his body. The combination of moves flowed together with a fluidity that showed this wasn't random violence. This was practiced, rehearsed brutality that Jacob had been planning down to the last detail. The rest of Drew's team tried multiple times to intervene and save their teammate from this ongoing assault, but Jacob's teammates ran interference, keeping Drew's allies occupied while Jacob continued his personal demolition of the Scottish Warrior. This coordination showed that the entire Bloodline knew what Jacob planned to do and actively supported it, making them all complicit in what was essentially a sanctioned beating. Roman Reigns watched from inside the cage with an expression that mixed satisfaction with something darker, possibly concern that his enforcer had gone too far even by Bloodline standards. The commentary team's reaction exposed the complete breakdown of professionalism that this match represented. Michael Cole abandoned all pretense of treating this as entertainment and started openly pleading for someone to stop Jacob Fatu. His voice cracked multiple times as he described the punishment Drew was absorbing, and at one point he actually said, "This isn't wrestling anymore, this is assault, and somebody needs to step in before Drew McIntyre is seriously hurt or worse." Those words coming from WWE's lead announcer, the voice of the company for over 2 decades, should have triggered immediate action from management. Instead, the match continued, the carnage continued, and Drew continued to suffer. Wade Barrett, who wrestled against Drew McIntyre in their younger days and knows exactly what the Scottish Warrior is capable of withstanding, went completely silent for long stretches. When he did speak, his words were chilling. "I've seen Drew survive everything thrown at him over the years, but I've never seen him look like this. Jacob Fatu isn't trying to win a match. He's trying to end a career." That's not heel commentary meant to get heat on a villain. That was genuine concern from someone who understands the business and could see that boundaries were being obliterated right in front of him. What's the most uncomfortable you've ever felt watching a wrestling match? Comment below because this War Games match might have set a new standard for viewer discomfort. The finish of the match somehow managed to be even more brutal than everything that preceded it. Jacob Fatu pulled Drew McIntyre to the center of the ring, positioned him for his moonsault finisher, but instead of hitting it once and going for the pin like a normal wrestler would, Jacob climbed to the top rope and hit 5 consecutive moonsaults. 5 times, 300 pounds crashed down on Drew's destroyed ribs and internal organs. After the third one, Drew wasn't even moving anymore. His body was just absorbing impact after impact with no defense, no protection, no ability to brace for the punishment. Medical personnel were positioned at the cage door, clearly wanting to enter and stop this madness, but the referee and match officials waved them off because technically the match hadn't ended yet. Only after the 5th moonsault did Jacob Fatu casually drape one hand across Drew's chest for the laziest, most disrespectful pin in WWE history. The referee counted 3, declared the Bloodline team victorious in War Games, and immediately called for the cage to be opened so medical staff could rush in. But Jacob wasn't done. Even after winning, even after proving his dominance completely, he stood over Drew's unconscious body and continued talking trash, continued disrespecting him, continued making it clear that this wasn't just about winning a match. This was about breaking Drew McIntyre physically, mentally, and spiritually as punishment for daring to question Jacob Fatu's credibility. The medical evaluation scene that followed was deeply disturbing and showed just how much damage had been inflicted. Drew McIntyre couldn't move under his own power. He had to be carefully rolled onto a backboard with extreme caution because of potential spinal injuries. A neck brace was applied. His eyes were glassy and unfocused, classic signs of a severe concussion. Blood was coming from his mouth, suggesting internal injuries or broken teeth. His ribs showed visible bruising and swelling even through his ring gear. This wasn't the normal post-match selling that wrestlers do. This was genuine medical trauma that required immediate professional intervention, and it happened because WWE created an environment where Jacob Fatu felt empowered to take vengeance to this extreme level. The backstage reaction reportedly caused the most serious locker room confrontation WWE has experienced in years. Multiple top stars confronted management about whether Jacob Fatu should face any consequences for what he did to Drew. Some wrestlers argued that Fatu went into business for himself and worked stiff deliberately to hurt Drew beyond what was necessary for the story. Others defended Jacob, saying he was just being intense and that Drew knew what he was signing up for when he disrespected Fatu in the build-up. The division this has created among the roster could affect WWE programming for months, with wrestlers taking sides and forming alliances based on their views of what happened at War Games. Can you remember another time a match caused legitimate backstage heat and division among wrestlers? Share your wrestling knowledge in the comments section. Drew McIntyre's injury report, when it finally came out, confirmed everyone's worst fears and validated all the concerns about Jacob Fatu's level of violence. Drew suffered multiple fractured ribs, a severe concussion, a separated shoulder, extensive internal bruising, potential kidney damage from the repeated moonsaults, and various lacerations requiring stitches. The recovery timeline was estimated at minimum 6 to 8 weeks, but potentially much longer depending on how the internal injuries heal. That's not the result of a wrestling match, even a hardcore match like War Games. That's the result of someone deliberately trying to injure another person, and WWE allowed it to happen without intervention. The business implications of Drew McIntyre being out of action for 2 months or more are staggering. Drew was scheduled for major programs leading into the Royal Rumble and WrestleMania season. He was being positioned as a top challenger for a world championship. He was selling merchandise and drawing strong crowd reactions. Now all of those plans have to be scrapped or reworked because Jacob Fatu decided that personal vengeance was more important than the company's long-term booking plans. The financial cost of losing Drew for an extended period, combined with the potential legal liability if Drew decides WWE was negligent in protecting him, could reach into the millions of dollars. Jacob Fatu's post-match interview was chilling in its complete absence of remorse or recognition that he'd done anything wrong. When asked if he thought he went too far, Jacob's response was ice cold. Drew McIntyre disrespected me, disrespected my family, disrespected everything I represent. I gave him exactly what he deserved, nothing more and nothing less. If anyone else wants to question whether I'm as dangerous as people say, they can step up and find out the same way Drew did. That's not character work. That's a legitimate threat to any wrestler who might cross him in the future, and it should be concerning to WWE that their talent feels comfortable making those kinds of statements publicly. What do you think WWE should do with Jacob Fatu after this? Should he be suspended, fined, or is this just the intensity level WWE wants from their top heels? Let me know your take below. Roman Reigns' role in orchestrating this level of vengeance cannot be overlooked or minimized. The tribal chief brought Jacob Fatu into the Bloodline specifically to be his enforcer, his weapon, his instrument of violence against anyone who opposed the family. Roman created the environment where Jacob felt not just permitted but encouraged to take things to this extreme level. When Drew McIntyre ends up with career-threatening injuries as a result of that environment, Roman bears responsibility for creating the monster that inflicted that damage. The question is whether Roman has any limits on what he'll allow his enforcer to do, or whether the Bloodline has become so consumed by maintaining power that they've completely lost their moral boundaries. The fan reaction at the arena told a complex story about where WWE's audience stands on this level of violence. During the early stages of Jacob's assault on Drew, sections of the crowd were chanting "This is awesome" and "Holy shit," treating it like any other extreme War Games moment. But as the violence continued and escalated beyond normal bounds, those chants died down and were replaced by uncomfortable silence punctuated by gasps and sounds of genuine concern. By the time Jacob hit his fifth moonsault on Drew's unconscious body, large portions of the crowd were booing not because Jacob was an effective heel, but because they wanted the violence to stop and felt uncomfortable being forced to witness it continue. Social media reaction has been even more polarized and intense. Some fans are praising Jacob Fatu for his intensity and commitment to making the match feel real and dangerous. They argue that wrestling has become too safe and sanitized, and that moments like this remind people why the product used to be more popular when it was edgier and more unpredictable. But a larger and growing contingent of fans is expressing disgust with WWE for allowing this level of violence, concern for Drew McIntyre's well-being, and anger at Jacob Fatu for apparently working stiff and deliberately injuring a fellow performer. The hashtag Too Far WWE has been trending for over 24 hours, showing that this isn't just a vocal minority but a significant portion of WWE's fanbase questioning the company's direction. The historical context of War Games matches makes this year's event stand out as potentially the most controversial and problematic in the concept's history. Previous War Games matches, whether in WCW or WWE's modern version, have been brutal and featured extreme violence, but they've always maintained an underlying sense of cooperation and safety between the performers. Everyone understood they were telling a story through simulated violence, and while bumps were big and spots were dangerous, there was always trust that everyone would work together to get through the match safely. What Jacob Fatu did to Drew McIntyre felt different. It felt like genuine animosity manifesting as real violence under the cover of a wrestling match, and that's a line that shouldn't be crossed. The legal precedent this sets for WWE could be catastrophic if not handled properly. If an employee can inflict this level of documented physical damage on another employee, claim it was justified as payback for verbal disrespect, and face no meaningful consequences, WWE has created an environment where workplace violence is acceptable as long as it happens during a match. That's not just bad optics or questionable ethics. That's potentially opening the company to massive legal liability from not just Drew McIntyre but any future performer who gets injured by someone claiming they were just being intense or getting revenge for a slight. WWE's legal team should be in emergency meetings right now figuring out how to mitigate the damage this situation has created. Looking forward, the relationship between Drew McIntyre and Jacob Fatu is obviously far from over, assuming Drew can recover sufficiently to continue his career. The level of violence Jacob inflicted demands a response of equal or greater intensity, which means we're potentially looking at an even more brutal rematch down the line. But at what point does WWE say enough is enough? At what point do they recognize that escalating violence isn't sustainable storytelling and will eventually result in someone being seriously, permanently injured? The answer to that question will define WWE's product and values for years to come and will tell us whether the company prioritizes short-term shock value over long-term performer health and safety. So here's my final question, and this is the one that really matters: was Jacob Fatu's destruction of Drew McIntyre justified payback for disrespect that needed to be answered decisively, or was it an inexcusable example of a wrestler going too far and potentially ending someone's career? And when Drew McIntyre returns, should he be just as brutal in his revenge, or should WWE pull back and find a less dangerous way to tell this story? Get in those comments right now and make your voice heard, because WWE needs to know where fans stand on this level of violence before someone gets hurt even worse and we're dealing with consequences that can never be undone.